I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
For weeks, whispers echoed through Buckingham's marble halls, but no one dared speak aloud what everyone feared. And then, in a moment that stunned the nation, King Charles broke his silence. Cameras rolled. Advisors froze. The truth was no longer hidden behind palace walls. It was about to erupt before the world. What could possibly drive Princess Catherine, the monarchy's shining star, to make a move that would shake centuries of royal tradition? Before we dive deeper into what this truly means for the royal family, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began quietly, almost too quietly. Reporters stationed outside the palace noticed a subtle shift in atmosphere. The usual flow of carefully curated press briefings came to an abrupt halt. Invitations to royal events were delayed. Statements that once arrived like clockwork were suddenly replaced with a curt no comment. The bustling rhythm of royal life, usually predictable and polished, had slipped into an unsettling stillness. Behind the gates, something was happening. Senior courtiers moved with urgency, their late-night cars slipping in and out of side entrances. To those who understood palace rhythms, the signs were unmistakable. An internal storm was gathering. Meanwhile, across the nation, curiosity turned into speculation. "Where is Catherine?" became the headline that refused to fade. Front pages filled with grainy old photos, recycled appearances used to fill the vacuum of information. Morning talk shows invited royal experts to dissect every possible theory. Some claimed it was temporary, a private matter that would quietly resolve itself. Others hinted at deeper fractures, carefully suggesting a divergence of vision without daring to say more. The absence of clarity was deafening. Every hour without a palace response added weight to the mystery. Inside the palace, King Charles was preparing for something unprecedented. Advisors worked late into the night, drafting and redrafting a statement that would eventually shake the nation. The language had to be exact, not too emotional, not too detached. It had to acknowledge the whispers without inflaming them. But even as the wording took shape, few around the king truly grasped the gravity of what was coming. Charles's demeanor grew noticeably somber. At recent appearances, his usual restrained composure carried an unmistakable heaviness. Observers noticed how his gaze lingered longer than usual. His smile faltered faster, and his silences seemed to speak volumes. Within the palace, tension reached its peak. Leaks began to surface not through official channels, but through hushed conversations whispered to trusted journalists. A phrase repeated among insiders like a haunting refrain. "A private decision has gone public." That single line electrified the media. What private decision? Who had made it? And why was the king at the center of it all? The unanswered questions fanned the flames of intrigue, making silence itself a powerful statement. The emotional contrast was striking. Britain's beloved princess, known for her calm grace, her steady presence, and her symbolic role as the modern face of the monarchy, had vanished from public life without explanation. In her absence, the king carried the burden of what was to come. The weight of centuries of royal legacy pressed heavily on his shoulders as he prepared to step before the cameras. Those closest to him described it as a moment that would alter the course of the institution forever. The palace had spent decades mastering the art of controlling images, narratives, and the rhythm of revelation. But this time, the story was bigger than their machinery. What began as whispers in marble halls had grown into a national crescendo, demanding answers. And when Charles finally stepped forward, the world would understand that the silence was never emptiness. It was preparation. But that silence was only the beginning. Because what Charles revealed next didn't just explain Catherine's absence, it redefined the monarchy's future. When the king's statement aired, few could comprehend its magnitude. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a palace misunderstanding. It was Catherine herself, choosing a path no royal consort had ever dared to walk in modern history. Her decision to step away wasn't just personal, it was explosive. It sent shockwaves through the royal hierarchy and left even Prince William visibly shaken. The fairy tale fractured in real time, and the monarchy's most adored figure had crossed an irreversible line. The statement began with measured calm, but every word carried the weight of centuries. King Charles confirmed that Catherine had formally expressed her intent to step away from royal duties. In one decisive stroke, the monarchy's carefully constructed image of unity shattered. What had once been whispered speculation now stood as undeniable truth, delivered not by tabloids or insiders, but by the king himself. It was official, deliberate, earth-shaking. The palace, known for its precision and restraint, had chosen to confront the storm head-on across the United Kingdom. Television screens flickered with breaking news banners. Headlines screamed of crisis. Public reaction was immediate and visceral. Shock rippled through every corner of the nation and far beyond its borders. Commonwealth leaders issued hurried statements of concern. Diplomatic circles buzzed with confusion. Citizens gathered in disbelief, as if watching history rewrite itself in real time. For many, Catherine wasn't just a royal figure. She was the emotional anchor of the modern monarchy. Her decision to step away felt like losing a pillar that had held the institution together through turbulent times. But perhaps the most unforgettable moment came not from the king's mouth, but from what followed. Leaked private footage captured just moments after the statement showed William's reaction. His face usually composed and deliberate, a mix of disbelief, pain, and something deeper. The realization that this was not a temporary retreat, this was permanent. For the first time, the future king appeared publicly blindsided as, though the ground beneath his feet had shifted without warning. The footage spread like wildfire, becoming the centerpiece of endless analysis. Viewers dissected every furrowed brow and every blink, searching for answers in his silence. Behind palace walls, chaos erupted. Royal courtiers scrambled to contain the narrative before it spiraled beyond control. Emergency meetings stretched into the early hours as advisors drafted talking points and planned damage control strategies. The fear wasn't merely reputational, it was constitutional. Catherine's role wasn't symbolic alone, it was structural. Her presence had stabilized public sentiment through years of uncertainty. Her withdrawal threatened to destabilize carefully laid plans for the monarchy's future. The sense of urgency was palpably like a centuries-old clock ticking faster with every passing moment. And yet, for those who had been paying attention, Catherine's decision wasn't entirely without warning. Her symbolic absence from recent state events had been a quiet signal, a foreshadowing missed by many. The empty seats at diplomatic dinners, the unexplained cancellations, the subtle withdrawal from high-profile appearances, these were not coincidences. They were breadcrumbs leading to this moment, each one overlooked in the hope that the royal facade would hold. What made Charles's statement even more chilling was its deliberate precision. There was no accusation, no emotional flourish. He did not blame, but his tone carried a cold finality. It wasn't the plea of a father-in-law, it was the measured decree of a monarch facing an unavoidable storm. The world now knew the outcome, but not the story behind it, because Catherine's decision, as shocking as it was, did not emerge from nowhere. It was born from months of unseen pressures, whispered betrayals, and fierce power struggles carefully hidden behind palace walls. And as the public reeled from the announcement, one question loomed larger than ever. What truly drove her to this point? For years, the world saw perfection-radiant smiles, poised appearances, flawless unity. But behind those gilded doors, something else was brewing. Late-night arguments, competing agendas, a quiet clash between the crown and Catherine's growing influence. The cracks began not with a single betrayal, but with a series of whispered confrontations that could no longer be hidden. What truly happened behind those closed palace doors? Beneath the polished surface of royal life, a subtle but escalating tension had taken root. King Charles envisioned a monarchy rooted in centuries-old, tradition measured in every move, cautious in every step. Catherine, on the other hand, embodied a modern human touch, a royal who connected naturally with the public, whose authenticity threatened to outshine the rigid framework the king and his senior courtiers sought to preserve. Her growing influence wasn't merely noticed, it became a matter of concern within the palace. Whispered conversations among advisors described her as to beloved, to central, to fast. One of the first to sense the looming friction was Princess Anna, lifelong guardian of royal protocol, and observed Catherine's rising dominance with quiet unease. Her words, spoken behind closed doors, carried both warning and foresight. If the monarchy isn't careful, the balance of power within the household could shift irreversibly. Her caution was initially dismissed as old-fashioned conservatism, but her warnings soon echoed louder as Catherine's popularity soared. Crowds flocked to her appearances numbers that often eclipsed those of the king himself. Her initiatives gained faster traction than palace-led campaigns. In the eyes of the public, she wasn't simply a consort. She was becoming a force in her own right. Inside the palace, her rise did not go unnoticed by those who controlled the machinery of power. Key royal advisors, seasoned strategists who understood perception's weight, began to move subtly. Invitations to high-level meetings arrived later. Her input on projects was quietly redirected. At major state events, she found herself seated further down than protocol once dictated. Each of these small acts, seemingly insignificant alone, formed a deliberate walla reminder of where authority truly lay. Though Catherine maintained her composure in public, behind the scenes, the cuts ran deep. Prince William found himself caught in an impossible bind on one side. His father, the king, determined to preserve the monarchy's traditional image. On the other, his wife, whose vision represented the very evolution the crown needed to survive. His attempts to mediate only deepened the divide. Private sources close to the couple described long nights of painful conversations, moments of frustration and quiet despair. He could neither challenge his father openly nor ask Catherine to dim her light to fit within palace shadows. The emotional strain was immense, but for Catherine, it had become unbearable. Behind her serene exterior, she was increasingly isolated, her ideas sidelined, her influence curtailed. Her presence was treated not as an asset, but as a threat. What began as subtle differences in vision had evolved into an unspoken battle for influence at the very heart of the royal household. It wasn't a conflict the public could see, but it was impossible to ignore. Every exclusion, every hushed meeting, every shift in protocol chipped away at the fragile balance that once held the family together. The palace had always been a place of controlled appearances, where disagreements were buried beneath layers of etiquette and ceremony. But this was different. This was personal, and the longer it went unresolved, the more inevitable it became that something or someone would break. Then came the moment that shattered the fragile balance. A confrontation so intense it forced Catherine to make a life-altering choice. It happened late, one evening long after the cameras were gone and the palace gates had shut. Behind locked doors, a confrontation unfolded that insiders now call the turning point. Raised voices echoed through the corridors. A decision was demanded, and Catherine, usually calm and diplomatic, was pushed further than ever before. Those present that night described the atmosphere as electric centuries of royal power and personal pain colliding in one room. Catherine had been summoned to a private late-night meeting at the king's request. Present were Charles, Camilla, and a select circle of senior advisors, figures who had shaped the monarchy's direction for decades, and who viewed Catherine's independence with wary eyes. The issue on the table wasn't ceremonial, it was existential. At its heart lay the monarchy's future succession strategy, and Catherine's increasingly autonomous role in shaping royal narratives, particularly through her direct communication with the public. To Charles, it signaled a dangerous drift from the monarchy's unified voice. To Catherine, it was a matter of principle and vision. From the very beginning, the tone was tense. Charles began by outlining his concerns, couched in formal language, but carrying unmistakable weight. He spoke of preserving unity, of safeguarding continuity, but beneath his words lay something deeper. Control, however, stood firm, defending her initiatives, her work with Commonwealth communities, and her belief that the monarchy must evolve or risk fading into irrelevance. Her words, bold and unfiltered, challenged the very foundation of royal power. The exchange escalated quickly. Charles pressed harder, questioning her motives and the consequences of straying from tradition. Catherine countered, citing the overwhelming public support for her modern approach. It was no longer a polite conversation, it was a clash of ideologies. Those who witnessed it recalled the tension as almost tangibly collision between the old world of monarchy and the new world of modernization, embodied by Catherine's voice. Camilla, ever strategic, seized her moment. Her interjections were measured but piercing, painting Catherine's rising popularity as a destabilizing force. She subtly positioned herself as a guardian of tradition. While casting doubt on Catherine's loyalty to the crown's collective voice, each phrase was deliberate, designed to deepen the divide between Catherine and the king. And then came the silence, not from Charles, not from Camilla, but from William. At the very moment Catherine needed his voice, he said nothing. Whether out of fear of worsening the conflict or his own inner turmoil. His silence spoke volumes. Catherine, who had endured palace tension with quiet dignity for years, felt, for the first time, truly alone, surrounded by power, yet utterly isolated. She realized this was no longer a disagreement. It was a reckoning, the breaking point. The breaking point came swiftly. Catherine, overcome with frustration and disbelief, stood and left the room. She didn't storm out in anger. She walked out with a cold finality that stunned. Everyone left behind. Her departure wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. The advisors exchanged uneasy glances, aware that something irreversible had just happened. Charles remained composed, but those who saw him afterward described his expression as grim and unyielding. Camilla appeared quietly satisfied, while William sat motionless, trapped between the world he was born to lead and the woman he had promised to stand beside. The confrontation may have ended that night, but its consequences rippled through every corner of the monarchy in the days that followed. Behind the stoic royal facade, Prince William was unraveling. Torn between his duty as heir and his devotion as a husband, his silence that night became the subject of brutal public scrutiny. But privately, it was far worse. Those close to the couple revealed a series of emotionally charged conversations, pleas, arguments, and long, painful silences that pushed William into the most difficult position of his life. The aftermath left him standing at a crossroads no royal heir had faced so acutely before. On one side was his father, the king, embodying centuries of tradition, expectation, and the unrelenting weight of the crown. On the other stood Catherine, the woman who had stood beside him through every triumph and trial, now alienated within the very institution she had given herself to. His silence that night wasn't indifference, it was paralysis. He understood the magnitude of every word he might have spoken, knowing that choosing a side would forever alter both the monarchy and his marriage. Those within the palace described William's days following the confrontation as consumed by attempts to mediate. He spoke with advisors, family members, and confidants, desperately searching for a fragile middle ground that could hold the family together. But the divide between Charles's vision and Catherine's convictions could not be papered over. It wasn't about one disagreement. It was about two fundamentally different visions for the future. Every conversation ended the same way: stalemate. William's efforts, earnest though they were, only underscored his inability to bridge a chasm that had been widening for years. As palace pressure intensified, the strain on William and Catherine's marriage deepened. Insiders spoke of long nights filled with tense conversations, Catherine's frustration at being sidelined, William's anguish at feeling cornered, neither finding solace in the other. He carried his responsibilities as heir during the day, shaking hands, delivering speeches, maintaining appearances while privately battling an emotional storm. He could not control the weight of two worlds pressed on him at once, and both demanded loyalty. Senior advisors, ever mindful of the monarchy's stability, began issuing quiet warnings. Behind closed doors, William was told in no uncertain terms that siding with Catherine publicly could destabilize the line of succession and fracture the royal family's image. The message was clear: loyalty to the institution must come first. Those words cut deep. William had been raised with duty etched into his soul, but the cost of that duty had never felt more personal. To protect the monarchy meant standing apart from the woman who had become its greatest modern asset. It was a cruel and impossible choice. The emotional toll soon became visible at public engagements. William's exhaustion was unmistakable. Observers noted the strain in his expression, the subdued tone in his voice, and the weariness behind his formal smiles. The media began to speculate, weaving narratives of marital tension and royal unrest. The heir, who once symbolized stability, now appeared, burdened by invisible fractures that no palace statement could deny. But perhaps the most telling sign was the growing distance between William and Catherine in both public and private life. Their once united front was faltering under the weight of unspoken truths. Catherine was reaching a point where silence was no longer sustainable, and William could feel the ground shifting beneath them. Every passing day carried the looming sense that something irreversible was approaching. And then, when the palace least expected it, Catherine made her move. She took the entire institution by surprise. It wasn't leaked. It wasn't whispered. It was declared openly, powerfully, and with precision, in a rare, unscripted moment. Princess Catherine broke centuries of royal convention by speaking directly to the people. What she revealed stunned the nation. It wasn't just an exit, it was a reckoning. The monarchy had underestimated her resolve. Now, the world would hear her unfiltered truth. No one saw it coming. The statement wasn't coordinated through palace press offices, nor timed to coincide with any royal engagement. It arrived suddenly, a pre-recorded message, released without warning, bypassing every traditional layer of royal communication. For the first time, Catherine spoke entirely on her own terms. Her voice was calm but unwavering, her words measured yet piercing. She began by acknowledging the intense scrutiny that had surrounded her life since the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight. Then, she shifted the narrative. Catherine spoke of personal boundaries, of the need to separate her individual identity from the relentless expectations placed upon her. She declared that she was stepping away not out of weakness or scandal, but out of strength. It was a direct challenge to the centuries-old belief that duty must always eclipse personal truth. Her words landed like a thunderclap across the United Kingdom and far beyond. Within minutes, media outlets replayed the message on loop. Commentators scrambled to interpret its implications. Social media exploded. #CatherineExit became the top trending topic worldwide. Supporters praised her courage, calling it a defining moment in modern royal history. Critics accused her of abandoning tradition at a crucial time. But even her harshest detractors couldn't deny the boldness of what she had done. In just a few minutes, Catherine had shifted the center of gravity away from the palace and toward herself. Inside the monarchy, chaos erupted. Palace officials, blindsided by the timing and tone of the statement, were thrust into emergency meetings. Charles's advisors scrambled to draft an immediate response, but there was no containing the shockwave. The message had already escaped the palace gates and taken on a life of its own. This wasn't merely a resignation. It was a declaration of independence, something no royal consort had dared to do so decisively in the modern era. For Charles, the situation was nothing short of explosive. His carefully controlled narrative about Catherine's role had been overturned in a single stroke. Damage control became the palace's top priority. Behind closed doors, aides debated whether to respond swiftly or follow the old rule: never complain, never explain. But this was no ordinary crisis. Catherine's message wasn't rumor. It was her voice, her truth, on record for the world to hear. And the longer the monarchy stayed silent, the more control it risked losing. Beyond the palace walls, the emotional reaction was overwhelming. Messages of love, heartbreak, and solidarity flooded the internet. For millions, Catherine was not just a royal, she was a relatable woman. Navigating impossible pressures, her decision resonated deeply with those who had long admired her composure under scrutiny. She had spoken not as a distant duchess, but as a human being reclaiming her agency. It was a moment that transcended titles and protocol, one that left a profound mark on public sentiment. But even as the world absorbed the shock of Catherine's words, another storm was already brewing for the monarchy. Silence was no longer an option. The decision had been made at the highest level. The king would address the nation. What he would say, and how he would say it, could either stabilize the institution or send it spiraling into uncharted territory. The monarchy had no choice. It had to respond, and when Charles finally spoke, he didn't just address the rumors. He opened a door no one expected. The nation stopped. Screens lit up. The king was about to speak, not through intermediaries, not through aides, but directly to the world. What he said carried the weight of centuries, but also the pain of a father and a monarch. Charles's statement wasn't just a reaction, it was a reckoning of his own dot in that solemn address. He revealed truths long buried beneath layers of protocol and silence. For days, speculation had swirled. The palace's silence after Catherine's statement only fueled the frenzy. Commentators filled the airwaves with theories. Historians drew parallels to abdications past, and the public waited for the one voice that could steady the storm or deepen it, the king's. When Charles finally appeared, the world leaned in. His tone was measured, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. This was no routine message. It was an intervention at a time when the monarchy itself stood on uncertain ground. Charles began. by acknowledging the undeniable reality. Catherine's decision to step away was not the result of temporary misunderstandings. It was, he said, the culmination of irreconcilable differences between the traditional vision of the crown and the path Catherine wished to pursue. For a monarch who had spent decades preparing to embody stability, those words were seismic. He admitted in carefully chosen language that these differences had been the subject of long, deeply personal discussions. There was no attempt to disguise the seriousness of what had unfolded then. In a moment few expected, Charles spoke not as a distant ruler. He revealed that he had held private conversations with Catherine in the months leading up to her decision. Conversations marked by sincerity, tension, and mutual recognition that their visions for the monarchy were fundamentally diverging. His words carried a rare emotional weight. He spoke of respect for her commitment, gratitude for her years of service, but also of sorrow for perhaps the first time. The public glimpsed the man beneath the crown, a father acknowledging that his family's fractures had spilled irreversibly into the public sphere. Yet even in that vulnerability, Charles remained deliberate in defending the monarchy's authority. He reminded the nation that the crown must endure, above all, that it is not defined by individuals, but by its unbroken continuity. While his tone never turned accusatory, his message was clear. Catherine's departure, though respected, would not alter the monarchy's course. It was a subtle but unmistakable assertion of control, an effort to draw a line between personal emotion and institutional duty. The public's reaction was immediate and divided. For some, Charles's candor was moving, even humanizing. They saw a king grappling with pain, yet standing firm in his role. For others, his emphasis on preserving the institution over reconciliation felt cold, as though once again the monarchy had chosen protocol over compassion. Asterisk, it began quietly, behind closed doors. A meeting intended to mend divisions instead deepened them beyond repair. What was meant to be a moment of reconciliation became the spark of something far greater, something that would test the very soul of the British monarchy. Tension filled the air that evening as the discussion turned sharp. Words, measured at first, began to cut with precision. Catherine sat poised, her composure masking the disbelief rising within her. She had weathered years of scrutiny, endured the quiet storms of royal life, but this was different. In that room, surrounded by advisors and family, she realized how far the crown's loyalty could stretch and how quickly it could retract. When the confrontation reached its breaking point, Catherine rose. She didn't storm out in fury, but with calm finality. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. Those who remained exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something irreversible had just happened. King Charles remained outwardly composed, but his eyes betrayed a grim resolve. Camilla appeared satisfied, her expression unreadable yet certain. William sat motionless, caught between the throne he was born to inherit and the woman he had promised to stand beside. That night's confrontation ended behind palace doors, but its echoes spread far beyond them. Behind the royal facade, Prince William began to unravel. His silence became a subject of fierce speculation, interpreted as weakness by some, restraint by others. But privately, it was neither. It was paralysis. Those closest to the couple spoke of sleepless nights, tense conversations, and long silences. William found himself standing at a crossroads no royal heir had faced so acutely before. On one side, his father, the king, the living embodiment of duty, tradition, and the unbroken chain of monarchy. On the other, Catherine, the woman who had given everything to the institution, now alienated by it. His silence that night had not been indifference. It had been the burden of impossible choice. He knew that taking either side would alter both the monarchy and his marriage forever. In the days that followed, he tried desperately to mediate, consulting advisors. Family, confidants searching for a fragile middle ground that no longer existed. Because this was not a single disagreement. It was two visions colliding, one rooted in tradition, the other in transformation. And no compromise could reconcile them. As pressure mounted inside the palace, the strain on William and Catherine's marriage deepened. Behind closed doors, Catherine's frustration grew, her role shrinking, her voice fading into the background of the institution she had served so loyally. William, torn between his crown and his heart, carried the weight of two worlds performing royal duties by day while drowning in private turmoil by night. Ever cautious of public stability, warned him sternly, siding with Catherine publicly could destabilize the monarchy. Loyalty to the institution must come first, they told him. The words cut deeply. For William, duty was sacred, but never before had it demanded such a personal sacrifice. To protect the monarchy meant to stand apart from the woman who had become its modern strength. It was a cruel and impossible trade. The toll became visible. At engagements, William's exhaustion showed through the polished smiles. The press began to whisper stories of strain, of distance, of cracks in the perfect royal image. The couple once seen as the monarchy's unshakable core now appeared fragile. And then Catherine made her move. Without warning, she broke centuries of royal silence. A pre-recorded message appeared online. No leaks, no press briefing, no approval from the palace. Her voice was calm but resolute. She spoke directly to the people, acknowledging the relentless scrutiny, the loss of privacy, the erasure of her individuality under the crown's weight. And then she said the words that changed everything. She was stepping away not out of weakness, not in scandal, but out of strength. It was a statement that shattered precedent. Her message was not rebellion, was revelation. She challenged the very notion that duty must always outweigh truth. Within minutes, her words reverberated across the world. Supporters hailed her courage. Critics accused her of betrayal. But no one could deny her power. Catherine had taken back her voice, and in doing so, shifted the monarchy's center of gravity. Inside the palace, panic set in. Charles's advisors scrambled to respond. But it was too late. The world had already heard her. The king's carefully managed narrative was unraveling. For the first time in modern history, the crown's silence was not dignified, it was dangerous. Pressure mounted. The nation demanded answers. And finally, Buckingham Palace announced that the king himself would address the nation. When Charles appeared, the world stopped. His tone was solemn, his words deliberate. He spoke not as a ruler above his people, but as a father amid a storm. He acknowledged irreconcilable differences between the monarchy's path and Catherine's vision. He thanked her for her years of service, expressed sorrow at her departure, and then, with carefully chosen words, reminded the nation that the crown must endure above all. It was both a moment of vulnerability and a declaration of control. To some, Charles's candor was moving. To others, it was cold proof that duty, once again, had triumphed over compassion. Yet the most haunting line came at the very end. "In time," he said softly, "there are matters that will be understood more fully." The nation erupted in speculation. What did he mean? A private truth, a concealed event, a deal unspoken. No one knew, but everyone sensed it wasn't the end. And they were right days later. A revelation surfaced that would shake the monarchy to its core. An anonymous envelope reached several leading journalists. Inside, excerpts from a classified document, The Royal Transition. Memorandum, its contents were explosive. The memorandum outlined a quiet plan meticulously drafted by senior advisors to phase Catherine out of key royal roles. Her initiatives would be reassigned, her visibility reduced, her influence contained. The tone was bureaucratic, but its intent was unmistakable. Catherine's role was to fade. One section even referenced her children, hinting at future adjustments to ensure institutional stability. The implication was clear: the monarchy's future would be rebalanced away from Catherine's line. When it emerged that Catherine had discovered this document before her statement, everything changed. Her departure was no longer a mystery, it was a response to betrayal. The public's sympathy ignited into outrage. Protests grew outside royal residences. Media headlines accused the palace of deception. Charles's words about irreconcilable differences now seemed like calculated omission. The monarchy's image, so carefully built on grace and unity, was cracking. For the first time in decades, the institution faced not just scrutiny, but a crisis of legitimacy. Was the monarchy truly modern, or merely preserving power behind a curtain of tradition? As pressure mounted, the palace scrambled to contain the fallout. But the truth had already escaped. Catherine had become more than a princessa, had become a symbol. Her act of defiance resonated far beyond the palace gates. It was no longer just about titles or protocol, it was about power, identity, and truth. The monarchy stood at a crossroads. A queen consort had stepped away, not in scandal, but in defiance. And the question now was not whether the institution could recover, but whether it could evolve. William, once seen as the steady bridge between past and future, now stood alone. His public appearances were haunted by absence, the absence of the woman who had once stood beside him, grounding him in purpose. Each engagement felt heavier, each speech more restrained. Behind palace doors, roles were reshuffled, duties reassigned, but no one could replace Catherine's presence. The monarchy's polished machinery was showing its cracks. Across Britain and the Commonwealth, debate raged. Was Catherine's departure an act of liberation or the first sign of a monarchy in decline? There were no easy answers, and through it all, Catherine remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no appearances. Her silence became louder than any speech. It carried mystery, dignitas, a quiet defiance that refused to fade. Weeks turned to months. The palace lights dimmed, the nation waited, and the world watched a crown, centuries old, tremble under the weight of its own making, because some stories don't end with a statement. They begin with one